This video covers the constant, or Gordon, dividend growth model of stock pricing. The constant dividend growth model of stock pricing assumes that dividends will grow at a constant rate into the indefinite future. If that's the case, then the cash flows are a growth perpetuity, and the value today is next period's dividend divided by return minus growth. Now, this one period lag is important, and one of the things you'll notice as we go through this is if you have the current dividend, the first step in this process will be figuring out next period's dividend given growth. Okay. So what is this based upon? Well, this is based upon the same idea as the bank account, where we leave some money in the bank every year, which creates growth in principal. That growth in principal generates growth in future interest payments, future withdrawals, and generates a growth perpetuity. The interpretation for a company is at some point in time, a company has some equity, E. Over a year, over a period, they get some return on equity, R. If they don't pay out all of that, if they only pay out a fraction of it, that is, they keep in the money what's in the company what's called the retention ratio or retention rate of rho, some fraction of the earnings, then next period earnings will equal last period's earnings plus the return that you get times the times the equity times the amount you keep. So this creates a growth rate in equity in the company equal to G, which is the fraction of the earnings kept in the company, retained, not paid out, times the return you're getting on investments. Usually people proxy that with the return on equity. Well, that generates a higher equity going into period 2, which generates a slightly higher interest payment. Again, we don't pay all of it out, we keep rho. That means next period's equity is higher by the amount of retention that we have, the return we're getting on equity, and the amount of equity that we have. Again, the growth rate is G. Also, because E, equity, grew with the rate G, and dividends are a constant fraction of equity, dividends will grow with the rate G. Equity then becomes higher the next period. You earn a slightly larger amount. You keep a slightly larger amount, pay out a slightly larger amount, and again, you have growth in equity. Because every year the equity grows and the payout is a constant fraction of equity, the growth rate in dividends is the same as the growth rate in equity. For example, suppose you had a company with a constant return on equity of, say, 6%, and you want to create growth in the company of 2%. This means that you need to retain in the company a third of your cash flows every period. So let's see how that works. If the initial equity is, say, 100, then at the end of a year you'll have $6 in earnings. 100 times 6. Write that down. What I'm going to do is pay out 2/3 of it. $4. That means I keep a third of it, $2, and that adds to my equity. That means I start next period with a 2% higher level of equity. 6% of that is $6.12. If I pay out 2/3 of it and I keep a third, what I pay out that first period is $4.08. So now my new equity is 102 plus 204. 102 plus the amount of Kira that I keep, 204. It's 102.04, 104.04, sorry. That's my equity going into next period. Six percent of that is equal to my earnings. Gosh, I'm going to have to stick this in my calculator at this point. So 104 times 6%, 624.24. Two-thirds of that is $416.16 paid out as dividends. So I'm going to keep, this is paid out as dividends. So I'm going to keep in the company 208.08. Plus 106.1208. Okay, now here's the thing. The growth rate in equity here, obviously in this case, 2%. It's also true in this case if you do the division. It's also the case that my payout 4 to 408, that's 2% growth. 408 to 416, 2% growth. Okay. So this creates a dividend stream of 4, 408, 416, 16, 2% growth all the way through. Well, if this is a growth perpetuity, then the value today is equal to next period's dividend, 4, divided by return minus growth. So if, say, for example, the return was 3% per quarter, the price of this would be let's see, what is that? 4 divided by 3 minus 2. $400. Now, this creates a relationship between retention, earnings on equity, growth rates, next period's dividends, returns, growth, and prices. So it creates two fairly simple relationships. First one, retention ratio times return is actually on new investments. But usually people proxy that with ROE and price. Now, often you'll have D0. What's reported in the financial press is the current or past dividend, not next period's. So if you have D0, you need to multiply by growth to get D1 before you apply the formula. So given any combination of variables, if you're missing one of them, you should be able to find out the last one. But let me give you a straightforward example. So on September 17, 2013, Yahoo Finance reported that Johnson & Johnson stock was paying a dividend of 66 cents per quarter out of earnings of $1.1275. ROE was 4.82%, and I've already divided by 4 to give you the quarterly rate. And let's assume the quarterly required return was 2.75%. What is the price expected to be under the Gordon growth model? Well, under the Gordon growth model, the first thing is the growth rate. It's the retained earnings, so it's the amount of earnings I have minus the amount that I give out. That's the amount I keep as a fraction of my earnings. So this is the fraction of what I get every year that I leave in the company. That's what gets reinvested to earn more every year to create growth. How much does that earn? Well, it earns income at the rate of the return on equity, because this is an equity investment, of 4.82%. Let's see, if we multiply that out, $1.1275 minus 0.66 divided by 0.1275. Sorry about that. Gives you a growth rate, retention rate of 41%. Is a growth rate of 1.9965%. Now store that. Then the price today is equal to next period's dividend. Well, this is the most recent dividend. If dividends are growing at a constant rate, the next dividend will have last period's dividend plus growth divided by return minus growth rate. Okay, so I'm going to need this. So I expect the next period's dividend to be 67.32 cents divided by return minus growth. Recall 1, equals 89.58. Now again, the actual closing price on that day was 89.91. So this gets us pretty close to the actual closing price in the market on that day.